All right. Okay, good morning, good evening, folks. Thanks for joining. Welcome and thanks for joining in today's webinar on rising demand for passwordless and secure authentication. I'm your speaker for the day, and I have with me my co-speaker, Soumya Tripathy, who is the Director of Cybersecurity at EY. We'll do a quick round of intro and then we'll get started to speak about the interesting topic that we have today. And you will get to know about some of the key informations and insights around it from our guest today. So I am Chitra. I am the Senior Product Manager at Signeasy, where I lead initiatives in the mid-market and enterprise space of product management. And I have a rich experience of building products and scaling them in the past in the consumer space, where it's mostly around building features that caters to customers and also take care of the technological needs and all of it. So Soumya, over to you. If you could do a quick round of intro and then we can get started.
Absolutely, Chitra. Thank you for the introduction and good morning, good evening, everyone, from whichever part of the world they're joining in. My name is Soumya Tripathy. I'm a director with Ernst Young. I lead the cybersecurity practice, at the Bangalore office of EY. And then, I pretty much have been working in the cybersecurity space for the last 16 years. I started my journey doing classic vulnerability assessment and penetration testing exercise. Then I moved on to, doing reviews, audits, and then more of different cyber product implementation. I moved into the IT security strategy space, and that's how my journey has been. Thanks, Chitra, and really thank you for giving me this opportunity to sort of participate in this webinar, and then really, very interesting topic to speak about as well.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you, Soumya. I hope our audience will find this equally interesting as us.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I'll get started. I have a question for the audience before we jump into the topic, and it's an interesting one. What percentage of security breaches are caused solely due to passwords? You can see the question in my screen. I would request all of you to go ahead and drop your best guesses in the Q&A box. We'll be providing answer in the end of the session. So please drop in your comment. The question again is, what percentage of security breaches are caused solely due to password? All right. So yeah, I think let's jump into the topic. Soumya, I'll stop sharing my screen and let's get talking on passwordless. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Soumya, like it's been like a couple of years for me building features and products, right? And while we are building features, even in Signeasy, when I talk to my customers and try to understand their and these are basically customers from the global space, right? One commonality that I normally see, or something that they have a common request or an ask when they are making a purchase decision also with a subscription is, hey, how secure or how compliant your platform is, right? And I get their
Of
point
course.
because of the nature of documents and contracts that they deal with, which are very much secured, and they care about the trust factors also. And that gets me really curious, like while this is an important criteria for them, how important would be authentication and authorization as a layer also, right? Which they want to consider right at the beginning when they are getting started. So with that, I have my first question for you, Soumya, which is going to be around um second. Yeah. So what are some of the risks for organizations today that they are facing concerning password-based authentication?
Yeah, so thank you, Chitra, for that opportunity. So let's start with, see, any identity, establishing identity of a person is very key to its organizational assets, right? You sort of type in a credential, which is a combination of your username and a password to get into any system, right? That has been very basic since tech has, we have been using tech for so long. Be it personal or be it organizational asset. Now, Now, obviously, that comes with its own challenges. With there are a lot of things to talk about, but then I'll sort of compress it and kind of some share some of the key points. And okay, now the one of the key factors is obviously the attackers in the cyber attacks which are happening nowadays. They are more towards getting a credential, getting a privileged credential in some of the other means. And once you get a privileged credential, you could access virtually anything within that organization once you have that. So obviously, and we have seen them in most of the vulnerability assessment that we do, the PT exercise that we do, we try to get some of these credentials, and it's very easy, when you have a password uh, authentication mechanism which traditionally everyone uses, it becomes very easy for us to sort of get those details and then obviously get into their system. So I think cyber attacks is one of the is a big challenge for when you have password based authentication. Some of the other areas that that we see are obviously the fraud risk, financial fraud risk. We do see a lot of cases during our reviews where credentials are shared among people, right? I mean, they just they randomly share among a lot of people, and then with that, what happens is you could potentially have a financial impact. This is the your privilege, your transactions that you can do in any financial system, any ERP system, for that matter, right? So that's one area. In fact, I've seen a lot of in my personal experience, I've seen certain cases where it's a very interesting case though, where you have a certain set of credentials who are only allowed to do certain kind of job, but then when you sort of review their internal database, I kind of found a mapping between the credentials that they use versus the credential which were actually used to do transactions that was somewhere in the table. That's a very interesting find, indeed. But then this happened because it's a password and the credential, right? You use a credential, you map it to some other user, and you can pass on transactions. So someone will not be able to know from which user it's coming through, right? And then people have a really bad habit of having very weak, setting up very weak passwords, right? I mean, in a combination of your social security number with something, birth dates. I mean, it's eventually, I mean, the lot of database dumps that we get of password, we see is very commonalities, in that space as well.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much interesting. And then some of the other areas are basic, like, you kind of not have, you don't configure your system, very basic, you don't configure your systems appropriately so that people kind of, use strong passwords. So there's obviously the way the weak passwords are something which are vulnerable as well. And then yeah, something interesting. I do see people in mostly the development side of things. In where you have discrete systems where you do the development and then you push into the production. So a lot of these developments are that's happening on the application, which are discrete. They're generally not connected to any identity provider as such. So you have individual names, and there are so many passwords that you have to remember. So people tend to write it down, and then sometimes what happens, these passwords is something that they in fact use it for the production access as well. So then you kind of get a production access because you have written that password somewhere. So
Wow. Okay.
yeah, very interesting. So finds that you see, generally, when you sort of do these reviews. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like trying to understand one of the things that you were saying, that the sharing aspect, right? Of how
yeah,
passwords are being shared. People are sharing maybe, like through chats or things like that. And then, obviously everything is right now open, and that's where, the threat is increasing. Do you like, it's like a follow-up to the answer that you gave.
yeah.
Do you normally have suggestions around how to make that sharing angle, a bit more secured, maybe? Because I do hear from you on the password, setting criterias and all. But from a sharing perspective, what are your normal advice to the customers that you talk to?
I mean, first of all, you should, I mean, I mean, any organizational policy, ideally, you should not be sharing any credentials with anyone. Your credential is your own,
Hmm.
right? So that's the thing. But then, yeah, while you set up, the first time when you sort of set up your password, your credential, you kind of have a secure way of communicating it to the user, without someone even knowing about it. So one of the best ways could be where you have an identity management identity management system in place, which could send you a hyperlink, over an email to your personal email or to like, as an SMS, and you click on it, and then you register there, and then you kind of generate the password rather than anyone knowing what your password is.
Hmm.
You could sort of generate it, and then yeah, there are various ways. Means, I mean, sometimes we have seen where you send your passwords in a secured manner, and where you have the only the key to sort of open this files and then see what your credentials are. But I do rather see that setting up your own credentials, using some sort of an hyperlink is a better model, rather than sharing your passwords. And like I
Absolutely.
said, you
Hmm.
should not be sharing your credentials at all. I mean, that's but but very interesting. I do see that very rampant in a lot of organizations. In Slack channels, for example, you will see
Oh
credentials
yeah.
flowing around.
I think
So
that's one of the thing that the compliance team is always looking into, right? Like the right
indeed,
way of sharing, always preferred via link.
yeah.
Completely
I
agree.
think I mean for me, I think if I say so, your weakest link is going to be very disastrous for you. So I think it's always better, even if be it your production systems or your development systems, just make sure
Hmm.
you have an identity management system in the backend, which is all managing your credentials and passwords. Yeah, that's always a better thing to do rather than keep sharing credentials. Yeah.
Yes, so just like the next question is what exactly is passwordless authentication and how different is it from a password-based authentication, given that everyone is talking about it and going towards a passwordless authentication?
Right. So I think, yeah, it's a very, I mean, yeah, that's a very basic topic that we're sort of discussing. So I think anything that we are not keying in a password would be a passwordless, where we are kind of authenticating the identity of a person using other means such as a biometric, a token, or a one-time. That's still a password, but still, it's random. I mean, it's not constant. It keeps changing. It's sort of a key that you receive through an SMS, or through a hyperlink that you get on an email. But then you don't get to, you don't get an email unless until you log in. So it's always better that you get it on the phone, right? And then there is facial recognition as well. So these are the other means in which basically how the passwordless authentication works. And then obviously there's a lot of benefits around it. I mean, like you said, one is I mean, you don't have, most of the time, it's very inconvenient to remember so many passwords, keep changing. And invariably, what you do is you kind of keep the same password, you sort of keep repeating it. While, we have a password history, which stops you from doing that. But then you just change a few numbers and that's about it. Pretty much the password remains same except a few characters, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's bad, right? I mean, so here is the model, a passwordless model, where it's very secure, it's a very secure, very convenient way of managing, the credentials. And I think moreover, I would rather put it this way that, hey, you don't, I mean, it's prone to, it's not prone to cyber attacks because, you're not sharing credentials, just different means of, authenticating to your system. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of benefit around it. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, like like the advent and the advent has started. Like we are seeing almost every application out there is having some other mechanism of 2FA, or like you were saying, biometrics or
Yeah.
additional authenticating factors
I
in.
think the early adopters are the banking and financial services. I mean, for example, all the phones that we use nowadays, I think it's a de facto, facial based unlocking the phone, and then the biometrics that we use to even unlock the applications as well,
Hmm.
right? So that has become a very de facto nowadays. Obviously, there's the ecosystem to support it, the hardware that needs to be done. But then, I mean, that's obviously from a personal device point of view. But then when it comes to organizational, obviously those are massive implementation, right? I mean, those have to be really thought through, and then there has to be right kind of IM strategy that the organization should be defining to even have such technology implementation within the firm. Yeah, that's all.
Any particular just like you spoke about the industry side of things, right? Any particular industry that you're seeing, or a handful of them that's seeing more adoption with the passwordless setup compared to others?
Yeah, I think the banking industry, the banking and financial services are greatly moving towards the passwordless, because obviously you deal with the financial information, right? I mean, very sensitive in nature. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not only the identity part that they are using for. they're kind of also using it for the authorization as well. That's the next. I mean, what you can process, right? I mean, one is obviously getting into the system that basically is where they're using the passwordless, and then for every transaction that they do, key transactions that you kind of do, you have to still use some sort of a passwordless mechanism like a biometrics where you kind of authorize the transaction.
Hmm.
So your identity is kind of preserved, right? I mean, you don't have to share a password and then get it approved by someone. The system is designed in such a way that you cannot do that. You have to be present so that you and your biometrics has to be there. So I mean that's fantastic. I mean you kind of have a lot of I mean you kind of reducing your fraud risk with this. And
Mhm.
that's really amazing. And then some of the tech, I mean, not some, I mean, a lot of tech companies, technology sector have also moved into the passwordless mechanism uh, of authentication as well. Yeah, I do see that. I mean, technology. I mean, some of the other areas that I could sort of think of is on shop floors, production line, or where you have a warehouse where you have a lot of people working there, and you always have the hassle of continuously keeping typing in passwords and then getting things done. Right. I mean, let's say for like Amazon, where they're, their warehouses, they're able to pack stuff. So
Yeah,
in there, it's very easy to sort of have these mechanisms implemented where, it's convenient, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's convenient, it's secure, so that's how it is. Yeah, that's my
absolutely.
viewpoint. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the convenience because a lot of application out there, right? Anything
Yeah,
in
yeah, absolutely.
case or even like, like enterprise level customers, they are switching to convenience, keeping
Yeah.
in mind the security aspect also. Like
Yeah,
we, yeah.
from an end user perspective, it will always be the convenience which matters, But
Mhm.
from obviously we coming from the security background, what goes in the back end, to
Yeah.
implement such technology, we have a lot of other things to take care of rather than the convenience. That's
Mhm.
obviously the last thing would be under our checklist. But then for us, I think the overall method in which we sort of implement it, it's a big thing, for an identity and access management for any organization to implement
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of homework that needs to go into there. The right kind of product, the strategy, the processes in place, right? I mean, we should not be thinking, implementing a passwordless product. I mean, just to get a product and implement. It's a top-down approach. You've got to have the right strategy. Make sure you do proper risk assessments. Across your applications. Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I do a lot of times I do see organizations going for such rich technology, and then what they do is they think, okay, we are only having our high critical applications in the scope of the passwordless mechanism or more secure way of authenticating, but then they lose out, or rather they decide not to have the low key application, the low risk ones. They kind of say, it's okay, let's not have them implemented because of whatsoever reason, cost or whatever that could be. But then that may not be in the right sense, because what happens is while one side of it, your systems are pretty secure, you have a other side of story where your systems are still weak, right? I mean, your authentication mechanisms are still weak, and potentially that could lead to someone hacking or getting into those credentials, and then those credentials could still be used to potentially damage your other high risk applications as well. So I think it's very important to decide on the right strategy when you implement your right passwordless authentication products within the firm.
Absolutely. Yeah. I do hear you speaking a lot about identity and access management, right? So are you seeing any emerging trends or technologies which is shaping the future of IAM? And also in particularly, I would like to talk about the single sign-on solution, which is gaining a lot of traction in the B2B space, obviously apart from other spaces. And like anything alternative to that, if you could just highlight on those.
Yeah, I think no, I mean, single sign-on is something that's not new now. I think for the last, I think, 10 years or more than that, I'm seeing people, organizations moving into single sign-on based uh, uh, applications, within their ecosystem, and definitely it kind of helps a lot in terms of the user experience. From a business user experience, he's signing in, where he doesn't have to continuously keep keying in credentials. So I think they have come across a long way, in this entire journey. But having said that, I mean, there are a lot of IAM systems, or rather SaaS providers, who have also moved into the passwordless based authentication as well. They do support that as well. But so here are some of my viewpoints, very interesting ones. I mean, while we do all this, we still, I mean, a lot of the system do still support a credential. The first time when you register with an passwordless authentication mechanism, you still need some sort of a credential where you need to key in the username and the password, and then after that you do your registration process. You kind of register your biometrics, and that, I mean, post that, obviously it's very seamless. It all happens through your biometric. But then what happens is the password that you generated is still saved somewhere. It is there somewhere within their application. So I think one of the areas, where I do want to see that is making the ecosystem entirely passwordless. Absolutely no passwords at all. In any database, or any form. For that matter. Yeah, I mean, the other thing, my I would rather say is that, so every organization has a multitude of applications. It's not just one single core application that these. I mean, so many applications, each with different divisions doing different things, right? And then these applications are kind of designed more from a functionality point of view, rather than I mean, there's a less priority towards having a proper identity and access management module built into that application. They're more looking towards how easy it's for people to work in business, workflows. Those take a precedence. So what happens is that we need to, I mean, if you're having these passwordless authentication integrated into those applications, you need to make sure that you do the right set of risk assessment to determine that those applications, while you cover the risk of a passwordless based authentication, but then if those applications are designed in such a way that it does keep a copy of local password, because of the nature they built in, because of the way that it is architected, then you still are at risk as well. Right. So I think, yeah, when you implement these systems, I think a holistic risk assessment, maybe detailed risk assessment may be required to see that you are investing so much, and then some of your applications are really weak the way they're architected, and you've got to fix those loopholes as well. The other thing that comes to my mind is, yeah, this is pretty much on the biometrics. If you are, let's say, your identifiers are biometrics, you or a facial recognition system. So those are unique identities of people, right? I mean, those are in from a GDPR or any Data Privacy Act perspective. Those are still identifiers of any person. So your identity management system needs to protect, or needs to have those controls in place to protect those identity as well. Those are very key. Your GDPR for that. You got to make sure that the application is GDPR compliant if you're working obviously in the European region, and then every country has their own regulations, such as the Indian DPDP Act, which has come pretty recently. So that's one important side of things to look at. The other thing is uh, because you're dependent on a single sign-on method, and ultimately it's the business user who are sort of using it, right? So it's a little different angle. It's not from a confidentiality angle, it's an availability angle. You got to make sure your identity systems are designed in such a way that they are resilient, they don't fail. Any failure in an identity management system will lead to business impacting business, and they will not be able to sort of process any information because it's heavily dependent upon your IAM system. So you got to make sure continuity is one important aspect to sort of touch upon as well when you implement these SSO or any IAM solution for that matter. And then I think more importantly, I would still come back, from a strategy point of view, you need to have the right set of strategy. It's just not product implementation, but then it has to be looked very holistically. You've got to have the right set of strategy, equipped with right set of operational procedures, processes around it, right? Because ultimately it's all policy driven. You've got to make sure you have right set of policies to drive all these technologies, right? And then you've got to look at the surrounding regulatory aspect as well, right? And then on basis that, I think then you should go for for an implementation. Yeah, so that is my, sort of key thoughts when you when anyone is trying to implement an identity management system within their ecosystem.
So Soumya, how's the adoption in this space, given that, there are obvious, risk and implementation strategy and everything that has to be kept in mind while the solutioning happens. How's the adoption that you are seeing with these kind of solutions?
So, like I said, I think like I said, I think the banking and BFSI sector are are the organizations who are moving very rapidly into implementing these solutions in place. But then everyone is following them as well. Uh, I mean, end of the day, you are trying to protect your organizational information and assets, right? I mean, it's a brand value that you have to protect at the end of the day. So gradually I do see more organizations getting into the passwordless based authentication. I think maybe in maybe next 10 years, I would rather see this is going to be a de facto standard. I mean, it's going to be like accepted across, that you don't need a password. It's just going to be passwordless completely. That's what that my gut feeling is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
I mean,
having you, we can keep on talking on this. There are so many interesting, but then I'm also keeping like a tab on the time. And
yeah.
I have one last question, Soumya, for you, which is, what are your thoughts on document trust or trust in general with applications being used, and how closely it is tied to regulations and compliance?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, you guys better know you're working in the space, but here is my takeaway. I think, ultimately, a document trust, if you say classically, we used to all sign documents, right? Physical signatures were all required in any document to be proved, and it has to be registered as well for it to be valid, right? So I think, with technology coming in place, we are moving into a digital space, where we could digitally sign documents, and then from a trust perspective, and then ultimately end of the day, you got to make sure that these documents are can be provided to a code of law. That's much important. That's why we are sort of having these systems in place, and so that the document is, I mean, what we're trying to say, the code of law is this is an immutable document. The integrity of the document is retained at any cost, so that it's a valid document signed between two parties, or many, across the, or between organizations, which can be uh, trusted as well. This is a different viewpoint. I think what I have seen a lot of this document trust is, so we do a lot of these 21 CFR engagements, where we do computer system validations, in which every document that gets generated or either prepared as a part of this entire validation uh, has to be valid, and then 24 CFR do have no guidance around how you can use digital signatures and electronic signatures to make sure these documents are valid. And then it's not about even valid, even the state of the document, like at what point in time it was signed, who signed it, all these details have to also be logged and maintained.
Hmm.
And 21 CFR, I mean, it requires a lot of documentation to be rather retained and demonstrated to reviewers. So that's a lot of work. And then imagine a reviewer, reviewing physically signed documents and then figuring out if it's valid or not valid. I mean, it's going to take a lot of time, right? So with e-signatures, and then with document trust systems in place, this is going to be very much faster. It's much more convenient. You can rely on this document, and then it's more reliable from that point of view.
Hmm.
And I don't see, I mean, as gradually, we do a lot of statutory audits as well. I mean, statutory, financial systems, where you look at a lot of evidences around it. I think from that point of view, I maybe in a few years time, maybe not few years, maybe in a couple of, I don't know, like you might just see that the your governments would want you that all your documents have to be digitally signed. Unless until these are digital signed, will not accept. So it will be mandated that any auditor who is going to audit this financial auditors who are going to audit these firms, they need to make sure that every document that is generated from the organization is digitally signed. It can be trusted. Right. As of now, the classic, we just get evidences of documents, right? Be it a purchase order or an invoice,
Hmm.
Obviously, we have been seeing a lot of invoices being digitally generated and then sent, but then there is still the classic old method uh, is still there where these are not signed as well. So I think, I mean, we are in a world where technology comes first and then the regulations follows, and that's how we are in a disruptive world. It's the other way. If you go back some 30, 40 years, it could be the other way where regulation is there and then we need to follow regulations. And then
Yeah.
it's a different world. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of technology which has
Fast-paced
come up.
technological advancement followed by
Absolutely. Yeah,
regulation
yeah.
line
So I
by
think, yeah. So I mean, with this digital trust, documentation, signing and e-signatures in place, I do see that this is good. There will be regulations coming in future which will demand or which will rather mandate having documents to make it trustworthy. It has to be digital signed.
Yeah, I think I'm just getting so excited with this conversation, and I'm pretty sure our audience would be equally excited. But then I think we are in the end of the session. So thanks a lot, Soumya. We'll just
Thank you.
go
Appreciate
ahead
it.
the Q&A session. We have a couple of questions from our audience. We can take a few of them maybe, and with the interest of time. And any other questions that we aren't being able to answer in this series from our expert, we'll definitely reach out to you folks with the proper answer. So, Soumya, the first question is, what are the best methods to remember passwords for 10 to 15 various documents or accounts? I currently use the Notepad app on my desktop with all my passwords, but no user login details. How secure is this?
Well, that's not secure at all. You should not be doing that at all. Uh, you know, Possibly you could use some sort of a password manager, uh, you know, a reputed password manager, which could be now, which you could have it in your system, in your laptop, which obviously, it has to be supported by your organizational software asset management team. They need to make sure that it's sort of reliable technology, where you can where you can actually store your passwords in a safe manner. You could use that as one of the application where you could save all these passwords, and then to get into that application, you could have a very strong method uh, of getting into that application and retrieving those passwords. You could use a password manager. Yeah, I mean, that's a very simplest of thing that you can do. But then uh, or I mean, yeah, I mean, that's pretty much I can say, because a lot of the other, whichever I'm going to say, will require organizational investment, like a PAM privilege access management solution. It's an organizational change that is required. You cannot, I mean, just for a few people, you can't do that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of organizations have sort of implemented the PAM solutions where the passwords are generated, all privileged passwords are kind of generated and then used immediately, and then they expire after the usage,
Hmm.
that sort of a thing.
All right. I hope this
But yet,
answers.
yeah, like I said, you should not be using any. I mean, you kind of need to remember your use credentials. That's the current de facto practice that we need to follow.
Yeah. I'll
I
take
mean,
the
that this is exactly what I'm trying to sort of say, in a development sort of where there's a lot of developers who are around, and then I mean, they have to develop so many credentials. I mean, and they tend to write it down. That's exactly what I was
yeah.
trying to say.
All right, Soumya, I'll take the next question. This is an interesting one. So, passwordless authentication, biometric, one-time code, etc., are primarily seen as a secondary or additional level in most of the cases. However, is there any development we can expect where the primary authentication itself become powered passwordless?
Absolutely, I think that's what we're talking about. I think an entire conversation that we're having is about making you the first login itself passwordless mechanism. So as to make it more secure, you don't even have to have a multi-factor in place unless until it's a regulatory requirement that you're kind of accessing very critical systems with critical data, citizens' data, for example. in government databases somewhere, you need to have a multi-factor. But then both multi-factor can be also be passwordless as well. It could be sort of your biometrics plus a USB token, or it could be some sort of a biometric plus an OTP. But then still you're using some of it. It's still not a password. It's an OTP, but then you can still use it. That's exactly what we're doing. Yeah, there's a lot of identity providers who are providing passwordless authentication mechanism, even for your first login as well. That's exactly what we're talking about. The password. It's not about that. The passwordless is not basically the multi-factor aspect. Passwordless itself is where you log into where you get identified to the system based on your credentials, based on your passwordless method of login, so that you don't have to keep keying in even a second factor as well. May not be required as well.
All right, I'll take the last question, Soumya, for you this evening. Do you see passwords becoming obsolete in the future?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
I think that was your,
that's
yeah.
yeah, that's what I would love to see. I mean, when I myself am like speaking like an end user, I would love to see the passwords where you don't need passwords. You sort of log in based on certain other parameters and absolutely kind of remove the good old password, which are difficult to remember. You kind of keep reusing them. Yes, I that's the future which I want to see. And like I said, there are still systems which obviously are passwordless providers, but then they still they have some sort of a password in the backend. So trying to reset some credentials, you still need to key in. For example, like your Google, that you have your phone, that you Android phone, for example, it supports passkeys where you can just authenticate on the phone, and many applications using your biometrics. But then Google still keeps a credential of yours, which is your username and password somewhere in its database. So similarly, your identity management systems do have a lot of they do have a mechanism of storing these credentials somewhere, in their system. So I think we should think about the strategy in which do absolutely no password stored anywhere. It could be just passwordless completely. One of the things could be like generating a password only for the first time when you register, and then once it's used, you kind of remove it. And every time you
Oh,
want to reset something or you want to do something, generate a password, use it, and then it's gone. So there is no password database uh, at all. So I think that's what the future is. I mean, if you have to really protect ourselves from the hackers of the world, yeah,
like a
that's the best
passwordless
mechanism.
world altogether.
Absolutely passwordless, altogether passwordless.
All right, I think we have ran out of time. Soumya, it was an absolute pleasure having you and speaking to you. I think I have gained a lot of insight as much as our audience would. We hope in the future again to have similar kind of discussions with you. And
Thank you.
to
Appreciate it.
pleasure, yeah. To our audience, we had a question in the beginning of the session around the password breach. The answer is 84%, and 84% of the password breach that happens. And these are insights from reports that we have gathered. So yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a nice evening and a great day ahead. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Goodbye. Good night. Thanks. Bye.